Hello, podcasters, and thanks for tuning in. I know it's a little bit late, but you made it to the Power Within podcast. Today, we are talking about a very important topic. We're talking about the power of being special. And I don't necessarily mean that everyone is special, which they are. I mean people who have Down syndrome, autism, and other mental illnesses like that. Should we call them illnesses? I don't know. Anyway, that's our topic today. Let's get started. Hey everyone. Okay, so I know this podcast did not come out on Sunday. I had a pretty crazy week. I ran another Spartan race yesterday. Super fun. I loved it, but it got me really exhausted. Um, and so this podcast didn't go out that day. And then this morning I have no power, so trying to get it posted was a little bit tricky, but that's okay. We're getting through it. Your power spark last week. How did it go? Were you able to track down your food for the week? I I didn't eat out all week. I definitely didn't do that, and I was really proud of myself. As for tracking my food, a lot of my food did become healthier. I did notice though that because I haven't eaten out, I eat a lot more tater tots. Because technically, eating tater tots isn't eating out. I don't know, but either way, I'm really happy that I don't know, talk about nutrition. In the next coming weeks, we will be talking more about nutrition, but for now, let's go on to our mental health because I'm a big believer that once you fix your mental health, your physical health just comes right along with it. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Let me know how it went. I'd love to hear from you. So we have book number one, which is called, well, not book number one, sorry. Um, I read a book the other week, and it was called Challenger Deep by Neil Shusterman. I don't know if any of you had read that, but it's about a man who has schizophrenia, and he doesn't outright come out and tell you that he has schizophrenia until probably the last couple chapters. So sorry if I spoiled it for you, but Neil Shusterman writes it because he had a son who had schizophrenia, and so he talks about it from his perspective. And when I read this book, I am so sorry, guys. My voice is having a hard time. But guess what? I got my water today. Um, water. Anyways, so he talks about this book about how his son had schizophrenia and makes the character very similar to him. Like his his um his son draws a lot and draws weird random pictures. Um, he starts having things where he has to walk around a lot or he feels like the signs are telling him to do things. And he just has behaviors that are very odd. But at the same time, he's still a person. And I really appreciate that. Sometimes with mental health, we don't treat people like a person. And of course, this time when I'm talking about mental health, I'm not referring to anxiety or depression, even though those are very real diseases. Um, right now, I'm talking about mental health where you literally don't see the world the same way. And I feel like it doesn't get talked about a lot. In the mental health industry, we talk a ton about mental health, anxiety, being neurodivergent. We talk a lot about autism, about having ADHD, but we don't talk a lot about Down syndrome or a lot about having autism on a more severe scale. And I kind of wanted to do a podcast about it because it's something that I feel like is very important to unleashing the power within. These are people who live differently than us, who see things differently than us, and because of that, they're treated differently. Luckily, hopefully, they're treated better than you think, but overall, they're still treated pretty poorly. You know what I mean? So it's just a little bit trickier to be someone with mental health. Um, so let's talk about the past of mental health real quick. Back in like the 1800s, if you had mental health, you pretty much had disease, right? Like they thought that seizures were just a devil possessing you, which would make sense because you don't have control of yourself, right? And we know now that's a brain issue, but if you didn't know it was a brain issue, I could see why you would think that your why it was a devil possessing you. I could see why you would think that. People who reacted differently or who yelled or who just didn't fit into society, they were sent to homes that weren't very well taken care of. The life expectancy wasn't very long. Or, like, you guys know what happened in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, right? I know it's a fictional thing, but the baby was literally about to be thrown down a well because he looked different. Being different wasn't okay back then. And I would even dare say into the 1920s, 1930s, 1950s, mental health was still not appreciated or talked about. People didn't know how to handle these different tantrums or how to handle these kids. And I don't think they didn't do it because they hated them. I think it was just because, you don't know what to do. I used to work at a mental health facility with adult disabilities. It's closed down now, but back when I worked at it, I was astounded at how many people were. I don't know. They were insane. There were some people who had borderline personality disorder. That is a disorder. That is a real mental illness. It's where you just are very dramatic all the time. Everything. You're either the victim or you're causing drama, and a lot of it is where you're seeking for attention, but it's also caused by a lot of trauma. Or there were other people who were schizophrenic, just like in the book I talked about. And there was one girl who had short-term memory loss, and one time she almost stabbed me with a fork. Like, it can get dangerous. Another guy who wasn't afraid to just walk around naked in the facility and didn't think anything of it. Um, the point is we had a lot of different people who acted different ways, and it was a shock at first. And when you don't know how to deal with these people, it can be scary. Especially because, like I said, one of them actually almost like hit me with a fork. Ugh, my fork, like, that is scary. But there is power in being able to talk to these people, being able to treat them like humans, being able to resonate with them on a whole nother level. So, how has mental health improved? Um, Mental health has improved a ton, actually. For example, we have a facility, we have more awareness now of autism and Down syndrome and, the other mental illnesses. Sorry, I can't label all of them. But even like bipolar, um, people joke all the time being like, I'm sorry, I'm just bipolar. But do you guys realize how hard it is to actually be bipolar? Your emotions are going left and right and up and down, and you go through episodes of mania, hypomania, hypermania, which is basically where um, you some days you're just so depressed you can't get out of bed, and then after that in a week you are so maniac where you feel like you're God and you can run around like crazy and you spend a lot of money and you sleep around with random men and you just do very impulsive things that aren't safe. But the control that you have over it, you have some control, but you don't realize you're doing it. There's things like that are really tricky, but guess what? We have awareness now. And while we don't know everything about the brain, we understand that these are mental illnesses. Sometimes I think we go a little too far because we use them as excuses, and we shouldn't do that. But these are mental illnesses that we actually have. How we still need to improve on them, though. I want to really talk about this because I feel like there's still a lot to improve. We don't know that much about the brain. And fixing the brain is not like fixing the heart or fixing the lung or fixing the liver, because when you're dead, we can do an autopsy and we can see the lungs. There are tests that we can do and we can see the heart. However, seeing the brain, we can't always see the brain. Actually, we definitely can't. And we can only see the brain when it's active and in motion. We can assume different parts of the brain and where they're going, but there's still so much about the brain that we just don't know. And that leads mental health to be kind of hard, actually extremely hard. And where was I going on with that? So we still need to improve on learning more about mental health and being able to treat them better. One thing that I was thinking about is how we treat those who have mental illnesses, such as autism and bipolar. And I'm talking about the mental illnesses that cause issues or that cause going against the social norms. For example, I'd love to talk about my sister. And I asked my parents beforehand if I could talk about her, and they said it would be okay. My sister is autistic, and I love her to death, but she is different. She is very different. She can't have a conversation like we're having right now She can't look you in the eyes. Um, she definitely has a mentality of probably a 10-year-old, give or take, even though she's 16. And she just doesn't behave like the other 16-year-olds, you know? Growing up, she was really hard to hang out with because she would go off into her own little world all the time. And even now, if you see her, she runs back and forth on her living room floor constantly. And she has a hard, sorry, I don't mean to cough so much. She has a hard time going to church and sitting down. She has a hard time listening to music. Basically, there's a very obvious thing that says that she's different. But how do we treat her? There are things that we have to do to step in. For example, when I was a kid and I got in trouble, I would just be put in timeout. You can't always put Emma in timeout or my sister in timeout. You can't always do that with her because she doesn't always understand what's going on. You have to talk to her step by step and really explain each step. My parents are experts on it. They are really, really good at taking care of her, and I'm really, really proud of them. Um, and even now, sometimes I'm really good with helping Emma, sometimes I'm not. But I remember that whenever I go over there and I play with her, we kind of do like we do noises at each other. Like one of the things that we do is we go ding 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 home, and she does that to me. I do that to her, and we'll do that about 3 or 4 times, and that's how we communicate. The other day, I took her to the lake to swim, and she loves the water. But while we were swimming, she dropped my snorkel, and it was in the murky water, and we couldn't find it. And we were both wearing life jackets, because she is prone to seizures, and I feel like a life jacket was better than not. So we were wearing life jackets, and she automatically comes to me and starts taking off my life jacket. Like, no reason, no thinking. And I paused and I said, hey, wait, what are you doing? And she's like, take off your life jacket. And it was very abrupt, and I was like, what the heck? But knowing my sister, I said, oh, do you want me to dive to get the snorkel? And she said, yes. And I tried. I don't dive very well. I don't dive very well. But that was just something random, you know? I feel like anybody else would be like, well, maybe if you take off your life jacket, you could go diving for it. But she didn't communicate that to me. She's very nonverbal in that way, and she just started doing it without realizing that she should have asked. And so there's a different way that I have to treat her. There's a different way that there's a different way that I communicate with her, that I connect with her, and there's a different way that she connects with me. But while there's a different way, I wanted to emphasize this point. There are 2 types of people in the world when we talk about mental health. There's the one side of people who say, oh my gosh, you have mental health? You're autistic? You're Down syndrome? I'm going to let you do whatever you want. You poor little baby, you can't do anything for yourself. There's that person. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's ill, I can't stand you, I don't want to be around you, I'm just going to avoid you. We don't shame on this podcast. This is not a shame moment. But I am bringing to light that those 2 things happen all the time. You know, we either look at them and say, wow, you have mental health and you should be acting a certain way to the point where we don't listen to them at all, or we just let them do whatever they want. Like Helen Keller, for example. I had a friend tell me about that, and she was very right. Helen Keller was let to do whatever she wanted because she was deaf and blind, and no one ever thought she could do better. But with a little discipline, she ended up being a very influential person in the entire world. Like, she ended up doing very good things. It's the same way with mental health. If we just let my sister do whatever the heck she wanted, she would be an absolute tyrant. But we worked with her on different social skills, and not social skills as in she has to behave like everybody else, but more like, how do I communicate with you in a way that you understand and I understand so that I stay safe? How do I compensate with, oh my gosh, music hurts my ears, but everyone else listens to music? How do I deal with that? You know? Just as with depression and anxiety, you have to learn how you behave and adapt accordingly. Taking the depression and anxiety idea, I could have depression and anxiety and stay in bed all day, but then I wouldn't get a job and I wouldn't actually have a good life, and I would just be even more depressed, right? But then as you learn about your depression and as you learn about who you are and what triggers certain things and how you need to respond when those things happen, you become healthier and better. And I don't believe it's different with Down syndrome or autism or any of the other mental illnesses like that. Or even schizophrenia, when we were talking about that book. You need to learn how you behave, how you treat yourself, how you focus on yourself, and then use that for your ability. Mental illness can definitely be a superpower. You are definitely very special when you're different because you have different abilities that other people don't. But you also have different challenges that other people don't as well. And I don't want to take away from that. There's also sometimes, I want to mention this too, sometimes we overdiagnose ourselves. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who claim to have autism, and I don't want to say that they don't, okay? Because they probably do, but they have a very higher functioning version of autism. Or maybe their autism isn't really autism, or maybe their ADHD isn't really ADHD. It's just them being a little bit weird. But the people who, like, we just overdiagnose. And sometimes when we overdiagnose, it means that people who do have autism are like, oh, well, they're just going to be normal like everybody else. They're not. They're not normal. We can't treat them like normal, but we also can't baby them at the same time. And I realize those are contraindicating ideas, but the best way to treat someone who has a mental illness, I don't think it's bad to talk to them about it. If someone in your life has autism or Down syndrome, don't be afraid to talk to them. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to hang out with them and treat them like a normal person. Understand that they have limits, like if they have photosensitivity, give them some sunglasses. If they have a hard time listening to things, give them some earplugs. If they have a certain way that they do things, go ahead and follow that. Accept them for who they are, and it gets better. They are people just like us. Just because they act a little differently doesn't mean that they're bad. You know what I mean? Anyways, I just wanted to have an episode where we talked about that for a second, where we discussed people who have special needs, and that we just make sure that we treat them just like everybody else, and the fact that we treat them with love, compassion, and understanding. There's also this idea that parents who have children with autism or Down syndrome are parenting their children wrong. You don't know what those people have been through. You don't understand how much effort they've taken to help them. My sister, for example, she loves wearing her pajamas all day, every day. And so when people see her wearing her pajamas at 6 p.m., they're like, that's not socially appropriate. Yeah, well, at least she's not, like, swearing a lot. That's a pro, They have to pick their battles, and they have to choose what they do and what they don't do. And the improvement for someone who is mentally ill is way different for someone who is not mentally ill, And it's just important not to judge. And so when you're working with someone, or you're around someone who has mental illness, and they start having an episode, and as soon as they start having that episode where they might be yelling or swearing or might be, something like that, look to their parent. Look to the person taking care of them. And I know sometimes that isn't always the case, but in the ideal case, look at the parent and see their response. Let them take control. Don't try to take control over it. Don't try to say, I'm the boss. Let them take control because they know exactly what's going on. Your purpose is to love and not judge. And imagine how grateful that parent is when you look at them and say, I understand. I get it. It's okay. You are safe around me. Everyone could just say that to each other. I try so hard to be a safe space for everyone, including those who are very, very different than me, and their parents. It is not easy having a child on the spectrum, or having a child who has Down syndrome, or something else like that. It is not easy, but it's even harder when people judge them for it, or say that they're not treating them very well. Let them be them, Yeah, that's what I have to say on the topic. I guess my goal for you today, the power spark that I have for you today, is that when you see someone who is mentally handicapped, go to them. Go to them and say hi. Talk to their family a little bit. Don't be afraid of them. And I know that you can't necessarily do that in 1 week, but I encourage you that when you see someone who has mental health, don't be afraid to say hi to them. Don't be afraid to ask them questions. Treat them like a normal person and be genuinely interested in them, and they'll be genuinely interested in you. Because I guarantee not a lot of people are going to be like that for them. Anyways, yeah, that's what we got for today's episode. Kind of just on the shorter end a little bit today, but I just really want to talk about the power of being special and how these people who have handicaps are special and are important. They just need to be treated in a certain way. This week, we're going to be talking about mental health again, but this time I'm going to share my story about how I discovered mental health for myself, how I overcame perfectionism, how I overcame my anxiety and depression, and how I turned my life into a life that I was really proud of today and really found the power within myself. After that, we're going to be going into a lot of, we're going to have lots of guest speakers coming up, and I think you guys are going to be really excited for this one. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Trust God, trust yourself, and hold on, let me try it again. Trust God, trust others, and most importantly, trust yourself. Love y'all. Bye.